Our agenda is, are there any amendments to the agenda as presented?
No, there are not, Madam Chair.
No? Okay, that I then move to approve the agenda as presented. All in favor? Okay. The next item on the agenda is the council update. And so that means you, Tara.
Oh, Terry,
You are muted.
Well, that was the most amazing council update of all time. There was no flaw with it whatsoever.
I know, it was perfect.
That was great. All council updates should be like that. Yeah, so my apologies. We are 3.5 months into onboarding our new CAO. And I think it's going really well. He's bringing a different, perspective and some different experiences from being a CAO elsewhere. Bringing a new strategic lens, and I'm really liking the work that he's bringing to the organization so far. Starting to look at some of the big picture items that as a municipality we're at. I really started to sense last year between COVID and the reorg, a lot of projects were stalled. And but this year I really feel that we're going to start to be building up those momentum again and accomplishing things. So on Monday, council held kind of a full day workshop, and we're kind of back to in-person meetings, although the council chambers does have the divisions, and we are making sure that we're adhering to all of the COVID regulations to keep that safe. So, but we are finding that I think that's a valuable way to get back to discussions with council. And so that workshop was kind of a review of how council's working together, kind of where we're at, and some highline conversations around some of the larger strategic projects that we're going to be looking at. So it was, yeah, it's good overall, and looking forward to getting back into the swing of things and getting some really effective things done before fall, before the summer. I also chair the Parks and Recreation Committee, and that committee is also looking forward to really getting some traction this year. The focus of that group for now is going to be dealing with the Horse Creek Sports Park. Mm-hmm. And so again, a little bit stalled, but we're kind of back to the drawing board there in mapping out what the layout of that site is going to be. The group has last year and into this year has heard and reached out to various different stakeholder groups to get an idea of what needs to be or what can be best, what the needs recreationally are that can be met onto that site. So that's going to be the work of the committee there. We did also receive a presentation from a new track and field organization that is looking ahead at trying to get a new track and field up at the Tri-Sites school site there at the high school. And so they were preparing that, the scope of what they're looking for. So really a new turf to meet the football needs and various other needs, and the whole track and all of the pieces that would go into that. So they have a very exciting dream that they're moving ahead with. And so they shared it with the committee just kind of as a heads up. And they're in the early stages of this project, but it is a multi-million-dollar project. So kind of overall, I think that's where council is at right now. We, just to highlight it actually again, people would have seen trees coming down on 1A. And that is all part of the initiative of this council to move ahead with the 1A widening to make traffic move more efficiently within Cochrane. The big change with that, though, is that highways are a provincial authority, and generally speaking, it was then on the provincial's checkbook to pay for. But knowing how important traffic is to the residents of Cochrane, that became a priority that we set out in the budget, is to be able to advance that project. So work has begun on that, and so you're going to see the widening of that, and probably pretty key, which might be a little bit shocking for everybody to adapt to, is that 4th coming down from the the tri-site school site is actually going to be realigned once it comes down the hill and will actually connect with Fifth. So some exciting things there. If you visit the town's website, there's actually some neat mock-up flyover videos to kind of give you a good visual of it. Also, the town is going to be starting on the construction of the RCMP building this year. And so if anybody has ever had the good fortune or misfortune to be in the current RCMP building, it's probably 20 years overdue for a new police station. So that's been a long time project that's going to be starting this year. So there's a lot going on in Cochrane, I think, as we move ahead to really meeting some of the needs. So it's an exciting time, and but I'm glad to be on this committee and getting back to one of my passions, and we get to start off with the Western Heritage Design Guidelines, which always spurs some of the intense questions. Does anybody have any questions on any of that? Sorry, Chair.
No, but I do have a question with respect to the the agricultural lands. Does that fall under Parks and Rec, or does that fall under some other committee?
So the park and lot, the Ag Society is it's a separate nonprofit society that has been running that site. They have recently managed to, I believe it's finalized now, get ownership of that site. So historically, it's been a weird mix of having the lands were owned by Rocky County, run by the Ag Society within the town of Cochrane boundaries. So that's shifted now. We're going to have the Ag Society running it in the boundaries, and Rocky County has sold the interest to them. They do have a rep on the Parks and Recreation Committee to make sure that the goal is to make sure a lot of the key players are at that table. So they do have a rep on that committee.
Thank you.
Just a clarification on the funds for the 1A that you mentioned. So the city of Cochrane will be paying, the town of Cochrane will be paying for that work. Is that what basically what you said when? So
yeah, essentially. So the 1A,
it cannot be structured as a loan to the province, and they'll pay us back in the future sometime.
Well, we wanted to get it moving, and
I can appreciate that.
Right. So this is we're advancing it, and I can certainly provide the actual breakout later. It is a mix of kind of municipal taxpayer dollars, and then offsite levies, which is monies that the developers contribute to there, and some other grant funding that we could potentially have used elsewhere, but have decided to use there. And so that's going to get that piece done. And then the 22 1A is still on the province's side of the books.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So just another question, has the budget, and because of COVID, has it impacted some of the things that you're trying to do, especially through Parks and Rec?
I worry that it will. The province has signaled that you're going to see a major cut in the grant funding that comes to the provinces, not in this year, but in future years. And so if you look at municipal budgeting, so when you pay your taxpayer dollars, that money essentially goes towards paying the operations of the municipality. So our staffing, gas in the trucks, those type of things. When we're actually doing capital projects, whether it's a rec item, or roads, or upgrades to stormwater and sewer, those type of things, they usually come through, we rely heavily on provincial grant monies for the capital. So operations is mostly paid for by the taxpayer of Cochrane directly. Capital projects, we rely on different grants and also strong partnerships with the offsite levies, wherever those might fit. So there will be, I have a concern, and that is something I think our council is going to look at lobbying for and signal some of the changes, because there have been in this budget and the direction the province is looking to do, there's been some big decisions that could have a real impact. One of the ones, of course, is the disaster relief fund. Historically, if there's been, flooding, those type of items, the province through grants helps to pay for those costs. The program now is they're only going to pay 90%. So if you're looking at some of the projects, like we get pathways that get wiped out, like these are the costs to repair natural disaster costs. If it's going to stay this way, it's something we're going to have to start, saving for out of your municipal taxpayer dollar. So it's a significant shift that could have an impact. So a lot of things to unpack, but one step at a time. And I think we're all looking forward to some sort of solution being made with the province's, economy, both, on the income and the expense side.
Okay.
But those are my personal thoughts. That's not
Yeah.
the official council opinion.
Okay. And Marnie's not here today, but is there any update with respect to the economic development group?
They did have their presentation to council, and I'll have to get back to you. I can't remember which update is most recent, so my apologies. But yeah, that work is still continuing there, as is the work of the Social Recovery Task Force.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so the next item is the adoption of the previous minutes from February 17th, 2021. Are there any errors or omissions? No, if not, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented? No,
I'll put
Tara?
it. I'll
Okay,
second it.
all in favor? Okay, approved. And the next item is the Development Officer's Report for the month of February 2021. Riley, Mr. Walden?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the Development Officer's Report for February has been included in your agenda package. There was a total of 7 development permits for the month of February. The development permits that were issued are listed on page 2 of the report. The summary for this year up to March 11th, that brings our total number of development permits to 28. This time last year, there was 44. So there is a decrease of about 35 or 36% from last year on the DP end. Our compliances, however, compliance certificates, that is, are up. They are at a total of 124 compliance certificates that have been issued as of March 11th. And this time last year, there was 76. That's pretty indicative of probably what you're aware of or what you've been seeing in Cochrane. Compliance certificates are very closely tied to sales of homes. It is usually a requirement to have a compliance certificate. And so it's no surprise with, I think, some of the real estate activity that's been happening in the town as of late to see that our compliance numbers are up and up fairly significantly. That does conclude my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay. Any questions of Mr. Weldon? Mr. Weldon? No? Can I have a motion to approve the Development Officer's Report as presented? George, all in favor? Carried. Okay, the next item is a workshop on the Western Heritage Design Guidelines Framework, and that is being presented by Adam.
Hello, I'm just going to share my screen quickly for my presentation. So hopefully everyone can see this. There we go. All right. So yeah, I'm here to present the Western Heritage Design Framework. A draft copy of the document was sent out with the agenda. As you may or may not know, this has been a long process, so it is finally quite nice to be able to present a fully fledged document for discussion tonight. So we're going to quickly go over the document and kind of touch base on how we got to where we were. As I realize there are some new members here tonight who were not involved in the process. So brief introduction and chance to talk about the Western Heritage Design Framework and why we reviewed it. Basically, we wanted a new approach to how the concept of Western heritage is handled in Cochrane, and that's one of the main reasons why we've actually changed the name away from guidelines, which I'll kind of touch base on a bit later. So we set out early that the goal was to make sure that we were clear, reasonable, and consistent. That way, both the public, whether they be land developers or property owners, or ourselves as both administration and the Planning Commission as approving authorities, could understand it and could apply it throughout the town. And we also wanted to make sure that this direction was being shared by both private and public actors, recognizing that as much as property owners need to comply with them, we as a town will as well. So, and finally, we wanted this new framework to be in line with best practices as we've kind of fell out of what was happening at both the provincial and federal levels, and allow for potential for new architectural excellence in the town of Cochrane. So, key question is, what is Western heritage? And it's very much a shorthand for how we communicate what Cochrane's identity is. And very early in the process, we went out and did some public engagement. And we talked with residents and got their opinions about what was important for them, what they were looking, and where they were looking for it. And some of the key takeaways we found that there's a concept of Western heritage for our local residents, which is very much about conserving Cochrane as a special place with a unique identity. But there's also a second concept, which is more common for visitors, which is the branding and uniqueness that we use to attract people and have them spend time here. So previously we've, in the old guidelines, we handled it very much as a single boomtown architectural style that we tried to apply across Cochrane equally. So this was very much based on early settler building styles, and sometimes it didn't make sense. And planning definitely found it was hard to convince developers why they were making certain measures or how it was being representative of the town of Cochrane itself. So the document has been revised to not only reflect this original architectural style, but to also explore many histories of Cochrane. So whether it be the railway, early industries, our connection to interprovincial routes, there's a way to tell those stories. And so in the document, the focus is very much broken down into Cochrane's history, which are those stories and the interpretation of them, as well as preserving that small town character. So the places that really make our downtown feel like home and make those connections easy to make. One of the big changes that we did was where we're applying it. And it was decided in the process that there are certain places that it's appropriate for our Western heritage to take place, as well as there are certain places where it's effective to communicate. So we found the 3 key places, which is our old town, which is our historic settlement, and is a key location for our historic buildings. We also have the railway transition zone, so the railway being a key part of our history, as well as being a buffer between our old town and more contemporary parts of Cochrane. And finally, Cochrane's corridors. Well, there is not much history held within them. It is a key location for how we communicate to visitors and commuters. So the old town, as you can see from the map, is comprised of our historic downtown, as well as parts of our East End. And the goal here is very much to conserve the physical historical features that are still in this location. as well as there are many opportunities for interpreting the lost historic features and intangible seams that were built up in the settlement area. And finally, the final goal was to conserve, maintain, and support that small town urban character through building and public realm design. And very much these are based on the fact of we looked at, again, that early settlement area, which really gave itself to that small town grid pattern, as well as this yellow triangle here contains probably 90% of the buildings on our heritage register. So this was the key focus for us. Second, we had the railway transition zone. And again, in this, as highlighted just kind of on this little map, is the properties that are directly adjacent to the railway. Because we wanted to conserve and celebrate the presence of the railway as it's a character-defining feature for Cochrane. Similarly, there are lost historic features in intangible seams, and it also represents a transition between the urban character and larger scale of the new downtown and the quarry, right? As well as from the old town, where we have our historic features and that smaller built form. So very much from this map, we chose to take these parcels on either side for specific reasons. And it deals with this idea of transitioning as well as what was historically built up in these areas. For those who may not know, historically, the space between the railway and First Street West was never really developed. It was used as rail and stockyards, but it didn't have the same history as the north side of First Street, where we consider the main street of our downtown Cochrane. So we wanted to preserve that. There are two different histories along these streets. Finally, Cochrane's corridors. And kind of hinted, the main reason we have these areas highlighted is to facilitate the communication of Cochrane's identity. So whether that be to commuters, visitors, or even residents, that as you're traveling throughout Cochrane, there's always somewhere you can see a part of our history. A good example of what we're going for in this area is something like the Manavision. So one of the other big changes, and one of the main reasons that we've changed from guidelines to frameworks, is we're dividing how instruction and direction is given. Whereas in our old document, the 2000 guidelines, we had mandatory guidelines that, they were presented a single build form that we expected everyone to comply with. However, interpretation was always an issue. So in this example here, it is one of the more straightforward ones of talking about roof styles. But in this new document, we are going to be dividing up how we're giving direction. So we're going to have mandatory design objectives, which are going to set the more high-level intent for what we're looking for, as well as non-mandatory design guidelines, which are there to guide people as they read this document and give them direction on how they can meet the objective. So our objective in this case is new construction will contribute to the variation in small-scale, close-knit building forms that conveys the quality of Cochrane's historic town character, which was something very much was the intent between the guidelines originally, but was never stated. And we're still carrying those old guidelines forward. So new buildings should still choose a variety of historic roof forms, including flat and pitched roofs. And so in this example, it gives flexibility to a developer or a builder, but what it does that the old guidelines did not is impart what the intent is and what we're actually looking for in that area. I have another example here. So the design objective here is new construction shall be designed to be compatible with and responsive to adjacent and nearby buildings on Cochrane's Heritage Register. And so 2 examples were done up, one where it's a more traditional style building and one where it has more contemporary elements. So both are meeting the objective, as well as they are using different guidelines to do so. But they still have some consistent elements, such as the data lines across the 2 buildings, the use of buff brick cladding. But they use different styles in the windows and glazing in the front to show that there are different options that developers and builders can pursue, while still maintaining a respect for those buildings on our Heritage Register. One of the other things that you'll see throughout the objectives and guidelines is build form is not always the best way to impart our history and our stories. So we looked at, working with ERA, our consultant, we came to the conclusion that heritage interpretation is an option that we can pursue to give more ways to tell these stories. So we can communicate it, various themes and stories through art installations, plaques, landscape design, but there are still options for building designs. So depending on where in Cochrane, each of these options may be appropriate, and they may offer different opportunities that we never really were able to explore in the past under the old guidelines. A good example of kind of what we were aiming for is the new Ford site, where the building itself did not meet some of those old guidelines, but we worked with the developer to create landscaping features to tell a story of the evolution of transportation in Cochrane. So finally, I want to touch on implementation and scope. So this framework covers new buildings and new construction for non-residential projects in the Old Town, the Railway Transition Zone, and Cochrane's corridors. We're proposing this with support from a future cash and lieu policy to support some of the objectives in the Railway Transition Zone and Cochrane's corridors, as well as future options for a thematic framework or heritage interpretation plan to better guide which stories we want to tell. But there are some things that are not touched on in this document. So like the conservation of historic properties is currently maintained by policies within the municipal development plan. Additionally, with like the maintenance of small town character in contemporary areas, where we did find that this is something very much in demand from residents, some of it can just be good urban design. And so you'll be seeing a lot of those features that make Cochrane walkable, friendly, and accessible in the new land use bylaw that's going to be paired with this document, as well as the area structure plans and area redevelopment plans that will be adopted for certain areas. And finally, guidelines for new master plan communities will be guided by area redevelopment plans and the integrated neighborhood design guidelines. As far as implementation, this will be adopted as an appendix of the new land use bylaw. So whereas before the guidelines were a separate document, it was never really clear where they sat in terms of if it was a statutory document or not. With this, there will be more clarity provided, as well as more options for administration to both review these applications, as well as enforce compliance. And so compliance will be done through the development permit application process. So this will be something that you will be seeing in the future. We recommend that any applicant in these areas come in for a pre-application meeting with planning services, so we can explore options about how to meet these different objectives within this document. However, once the application is submitted, it will go through a planning services review. Then if the application is for a discretionary use, or they're requesting a variance, whether it is to something in the land use bylaw or to the framework itself, it will come to the Cochrane Planning Commission for review. And again, once a decision has been made, a notice of decision will be sent out, and depending on the circumstances, there will be an opportunity to appeal to our Subdivisions and Development Appeal Board, which was never clear in the previous case. So moving forward, new applications will come with an additional design brief. So when we review it or present it to the Cochrane Planning Commission, there will be a page that will describe how each objective in these areas are being met. So that's my kind of high level view of the document. I hope that brought everyone up to speed, but I know you've all had a chance to review it. So if there's any comments or questions, we would gladly take them right now.
Deb, oh, there
Right.
you go.
Yeah, I forgot to unmute, I'm sorry. So thank you very much, Adam. So I'm just wondering, does anyone have any questions or looking for clarification or anything from what Adam just presented?
I'd like to understand, sorry, I'd like to understand, how long has this process been going on, to get to this level of a draft?
So through the chair, it's been approximately a year and a half. So we started in the summer of 2019, where we did most of our public engagement. We were very much doing it hand in hand with the land use review project. And it was I believe it was December 2019 was when we did our RFP and we hired ERA as our consultant. And so throughout 2020, we were working with ERA to develop this document, as well as throughout that time, we formed a stakeholder group, which we've connected with a couple times, as well as presenting updates to the Cochrane Planning Commission.
So this will, if I understand correctly, this will be part of the planning team's or planning department's review of any application. Will now, once this is adopted, will also follow these type of frameworks and guidelines to in order to be approved. Is this correct?
Yes. So how we're proposing it be adopted is part of the land use bylaw. So this framework would be given equal weight to any, to every application. And the same way that we'd look at, setbacks, height, right, or land use.
My last question is, this cash in lieu seems to be, or in my experience, seems to be a problem area going forward. Just to, when you get into negotiations of putting a price value on an architectural or heritage design that you wonder, I wonder who will have that final authority of where does that authority finally lie in deciding what sort of cash the town will accept for people, for designs that do not comply but will take money for it?
Yeah, so in that case, it will ultimately fall to administration. So when we're reviewing an application, we will be looking at the valuation of the project. And how it's currently written in this draft is that we take a 0.5% of the building. So the option there for a developer is to make that investment in the building themselves, or make a contribution to the town so that we could make an investment offsite somewhere. But ultimately, it would still be part of the review process and ultimately part of the decision we make. So there would be a condition that the developer would pay X amount before permits fully issued, as well as the forthcoming policy would give some more details about where that money would be stored within the town and how it would actually be handled and assigned to new projects.
Thank you, Adam.
So thank you, Tara.
Yeah, thank you. Adam, can you bring up the screen again where you showed the different zones?
I think it's slide 8.
Nicely done, Deb.
Is this the slide
Oh,
that you were
six.
talking about?
That's the one I was thinking of.
Glasses would
Thank
be
you.
good.
So, so like the old town will have a certain character to it that makes sense to me, and the approach to corridors really makes sense to me, and the railway transition makes sense to me. Now, but does this mean that and right now we don't apply the heritage to anything residential. But so my question is, what will be our approach to residential style, I guess? And then none of this is then speaking to any industrial style. And I know there was some push-pull on applying the design to the industrial area, but I think, you know, now that you look at the area along Griffin Road, I'm quite glad that we did have some say on that design. So those are my questions really, what's the thoughts around the rest of the town? What are our thoughts about how to bring the residential, keeping some sort of unique feel to it, and then the industrial lens?
Yeah, for sure. So the approach is that everything outside of these areas is going to be considered contemporary Cochrane. That's not to say that there isn't going to be design thought put into them. It's just that they're not going to be the most effective ways where we can communicate heritage and history. So very much in the new land use bylaw, there'll be things that will talk to walkability, bringing storefronts to the street, things that will make that contribute to that small town feel, but are not necessarily have a specific story behind them. Whereas these areas that we've highlighted are, for one reason or another, important to Cochrane's identity. So such as the Old Town, where we have most of our historic buildings, or the Railway Transition Zone, which is highlighting one of the key features that help shape Cochrane. As far as for like new neighborhoods and residential areas, very much the design direction that will be provided for them will be through either our existing integrated neighborhood guidelines, or when they come in for an area structure plan, we would look at that statutory document that they're bringing in, provide guidance for how they see that neighborhood develop and the stories that will be told within it.
Okay. Okay, I hear that. I did have some feedback on the corridor, so I agree with the approach of essentially where are we trying to communicate this. But I would like some thought and maybe a further discussion put in to other corridors, because I feel that Railway and Griffin, those other corridors that we've been talking about in that corridor design study, whatever it was called, I apologize, are also something that I think where we might want to be able to be showcasing the heritage. So that's just my thoughts on that at this point. But overall, I agree with the strategy. So
So
Griffin and Railway.
was that a question, Tara, or?
That's just kind of a heads up for anybody that might be presenting this to council. But I would also actually like to see what the rest of my colleagues on this committee think, whether there's some thought that we should be looking at the character areas beyond what's being proposed. And what I'm saying is I'd like some thought to being put as we redevelop along Griffin and Railway as well. So once you kind of come off the bridge, the new bridge, right? So if you come up and you're going to be like, what's changing is what we consider historical downtown. Right now, if you're talking about Cochrane, you're thinking about historical downtown. Maybe if you've moved here recently, you're also thinking of the quarry, right? But once Griffin comes on board, or sorry, once Greystone comes on board and with the bridge, I think you're seeing the focal point of our downtown is actually expanding, right? So it's going to be historical downtown, the quarry, and Greystone is really going to make up our urban center. And I'd really like to ensure that those corridors where people are moving through that so primarily Griffin and Railway, would have some sort of thought to them, just like, Griffin and River, just like Railway is what I'm trying to share. I wish I had a button and a pen. So anyhow, if anybody had any thoughts on that, I just wanted to share that idea. That's something that interests me. And then I'm also a little bit red flagged on the cash in lieu example, or the cash in lieu concept. Can you give an example of how that might play out?
For sure. So when we looked at, sorry, I'll roll back. So this goes back to when we're looking at the concept of heritage interpretation and how we can best communicate what Cochrane is. And we found that building form isn't always the best option, especially when we're competing with national brands that have a very fixed design and are very much not willing to change that because it's part of their identity that they want to communicate. And whereas in the old town, like in our historic downtown and in the East End, concessions will need to be made. It's in those other areas, especially on Cochrane's corridors, where it didn't quite fit to always have a building, look like a historic barn when you're passing it at highway speeds. So with heritage interpretation, it gives the option for new on-site strategies. And like I talked about the new Ford location, where they took that interpretation and applied it to their site. So they have kind of, as you walk towards the building, you'll see an evolution of transportation from horseback riding to wagons to more modern or installation showing more modern motor vehicles. And so that's kind of the direction we wanted to see more and more in, especially in Cochrane's corridors, but there's also options in the railway transition zone as well. So there's on-site design strategies, but the other option that was presented was a financial contribution in lieu that we could then take and invest that money off-site. So if you look at Cochrane's corridors, it's very much beside the highways where there is a good chunk of publicly owned land that we could use it on. So the one example that was prepared was when we're looking at Highway 22 and that highway commercial area in West Valley. So where we could very much have a no cash in lieu option, and every developer would be expected to have some form of heritage interpretation on their site. And it would very much allow the property owners to be creative. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a coherent design across all those properties. Whereas with the cash in lieu option, there's always options for the town to take that cash and use it to, say, build a gateway feature or enhance the landscaping along the highway. There's still always option for a private landowner to do something on their site, but it does give the town an option to have some control of what Cochrane's corridors could look like.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I hear that. And then another question, and thank you for your patience. So, like in looking at things have adjusted around like Cochrane Toyota and the Cochrane, Ford site, as these, big businesses with their own brand have come in and we struggled together to kind of find the blend. The comments that I hear from those sites isn't necessarily that they didn't fit into the Western Heritage Design Guideline. It's actually the effect of the lights that they're using on the site that, are running in contrary to, we actually do have a policy around light pollution that ran contrary to that. Is there any way that lighting is being considered in these?
So through the chair, like the question of lighting, we're very much in our old guidelines was something where we stipulated like what type of fixture that they would use, and that's kind of why you see lots of developers default to gooseneck lighting. That isn't so much going to be approached as much in the guideline or in the new framework, as more it's going to be a land use bylaw issue. So very much if you think this framework is trying to, communicate the look and feel of the building, whereas the land use bylaw is going to be more regarding the actual physical features and things that will be controlled through that. So things like lighting policies and signage will be much more prominently in the land use bylaw.
Okay, so what I'm just trying to make sure is that we have some sort of strategy in place, because I mean, I think you can see Cochrane Toyota from space. Those lights are so intensive, right? So in what documents and what policies are we going to find a better solution to that moving ahead? If it's not this, it's through the land use, or where can I be assured that we've got a handle on that?
Yeah, and it'll definitely be through the land use bylaw where lighting is important to Cochrane. It's not necessarily a matter of, it doesn't necessarily meet the goal of this document, which is to communicate our identity, whereas the land use bylaw is more the more appropriate tool for regulating such factors on a building.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Like, I certainly understand they're trying to move away from being less prescriptive to allowing the flexibility for those developers to meet the spirit with whatever creativity they bring to the situation. So that's my interpretation of what we're doing here. So overall, pretty good, I think. So thank you very much for letting me ask those questions.
Thank you, Adam. I have a number of questions also. So in looking at the creativity, so if we have an area where a new building can put in design elements and referring to our heritage and history, who has oversight of whether or not that's appropriate for that particular land or for that particular development? So does that oversight of this is a good story to be told, you're doing it in a respectful and great way, and does that come under your department, Mr. Weldon, still, or who makes those decisions?
Sure. That was directed to me, Madam Chair. Sorry.
Well, or
I
Adam.
think I'll let Adam have the opportunity to respond.
Sure. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. So very much it is going to be through administration, as the same way the current guidelines were implemented. However, there's going to be options now that if there is, something we're unsure about, if we feel that it's not clear if a proposal is meeting one of the design objectives, we now have the power to refer it to the Planning Commission to make that decision as well, since we're tying it to the development process itself.
Okay, so I think what I'm trying to drill down is who has the decision with respect to, so when you say administration is going to be making the decisions, do you mean the planning department will be making the decisions as to whether that historical element is something that we want to approve?
Yeah, so through the chair, so say we're looking at the old town and we have a new building going in, the planning department will do a review based on what they're proposing to see if they're going to meet the objectives for that area. If they meet all of the objectives, if they meet all the objectives and all the other requirements of the land use bylaw, we can issue a decision for it. But very much how we're going to evaluate those objectives are through the guidelines themselves. So they're written in such a way that it's to help an applicant understand how to meet an objective, as well as tell administration to what to look for as well.
Yeah, and I fully understand the land use bylaw and the decision of the building and those kinds of things. What I'm wondering is if I decide I'm putting up a new building and I'm deciding to put a new, a new horse or something that's out on the front of my, on the boulevard, or so who has decisions as to whether or not what I'm doing is in alignment with the history of Cochrane, the heritage and history of Cochrane?
Okay, sorry, I think I understand a bit better what you're asking now, and part of it will be, it is ultimately line administration, but what we're looking at is moving forward, looking at options for developing either a heritage interpretation plan or a heritage interpretation plan or a thematic framework. So a document that would more clearly identify the stories we want to tell and how to tell them and what aspects of them are important. Right now, that is currently open-ended. So we would expect, say, if a specific developer to come in, we would have a pre-application meeting with them. We could talk the history of the site with them, talk about potential ways to interpret it. If they have a proposal, we can definitely review it and see how that matches up to our guidelines and our objectives. So I hope that gives a bit more clarity.
Yeah, I am just trying to get an understanding of process, because you referred to the decision being through administration. Is there a part of administration that holds the history? Is it tourism? Is it someplace else? Is it something that might not, or does it fit in the planning department, or do you see it fitting in the planning department? I'm just not sure where I see that fitting.
Yeah, Adam, if I can, it's a really good point, Madam Chair. You know, the history component, not necessarily every planner in the planning department is a historian on Cochrane's history. So point well taken. I think in these cases, we would rely on our partners, such as CHAPS and the Stockman's museum that's actually attached to the ranch house here. I think if there was ever any question about what the history was on the site, or something that was being proposed, we would rely on the resources that are available to us, such as those groups.
Okay, thank you. I was just looking for some clarity as to where it fits in the administrative responsibility to determine that. The other question I had, Adam, was again on slide 6, and it was to do with okay, so with the, with the railway transition zone, so the blue component there, is that railway transition zone only on the south side, or is it on the south side and the north side of the road? So is it spanning both sides of the road?
Yeah, so through the chair, the railway transition zone applies to any parcel directly adjacent to the railway. So if you're looking at our downtown, it would be the parcels on the south side of First Street, as well as the north side of Railway Street. And that is very much in part for what the history of those sites are. So the historic railway station, the stockyards that were used there, at one point it was actually just a tree line, as well as it being a place to transition from that smaller scale old town to the more contemporary and large scale buildings in the new downtown or the quarry.
Okay, so I think a comment just from my own perspective, I'm just curious or wondering if there's an advantage is as we go forward and looking at perhaps having a public railway system, going through downtown, is there some advantage of maybe having those heritage elements on both sides of the street and continuing down to Fifth Avenue, where we're going to have the, what's it called? It's not the tri-site, but the sites now where the curling rink is, and so that people that are walking all the way through and have a sense of connectivity. So similarity, I think.
Yeah, for sure. There are definitely elements of that, but also like some of those design features that are really going to, connect those sites together, are better explored through the land use bylaw and some of the more pedestrian focused policies that are going to be put forward. Whereas this framework is more trying to impart how we're going to be having, say, like in the case of the railway transition zone, buildings that are going to be, directly across from those historic buildings on First Street, and how it kind of scales up to the new downtown. That's not saying that the new downtown is not going to have a lack of salt when it comes to urban design. It's just that we found that the features that were really going to be impactful there are better done through the land use bylaw.
So as an example, I mean, we have a current library that may or may not exist in the future. It perhaps could be replaced by another building that has no heritage guidelines applied to it.
It would be, yes. So with that site, yes, it could be a building that would not comply or would not follow this framework. That doesn't necessarily mean there won't be sought like through our land use bylaw and policies within the MDP that wouldn't guide how that site's developed. It's just you may not see, probably the best example would be there's not like a historic building beside that site that it would need to pay homage to or reference in its design. It could be its own unique building that is communicating what Cochrane currently is on that site.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, and it's just I just wonder about the ability to make a connectivity between as a heritage down. They don't need to look like heritage houses, but to have elements of heritage buildings that are in some of the larger presentation might be good. So, I don't know how you feel about that, Tara, as a counselor, that the railway transition zone ends abruptly at the north side of railway.
Well, I think it makes sense, because if I'm understanding what I'm saying, that if a new building comes into place, it has to blend with the one next to it, if I'm understanding that correctly, right? And so in your concern, if I'm understanding it correctly, was that along railway, but if I'm reading this right, the railway zone is going to be Fifth all the way to what, River? Is that correct, Adam?
Through the chair would be beyond river. So the definition we used is any parcel adjacent to the railway. So you can see even in Griffin Industrial Point, some of those parcels would be subject to this zone, as there is, as they basically still interface with parts of our old town. Yeah.
So, and I get that, if they're across the tracks and when we're going to put the pedestrian crossing there, that'll go. Yeah, and then those ones on the western side, that I can see that making sense because that's already kind of the Greystone piece. Yeah, I don't know. It'll be something to drill into, because I do want to make sure that those are blended and that
Mhm.
point of that corridor is there, but it is a difficult thing, I think, to blend that historical piece and the railway piece, and then with what we've got going on in the quarry. So, anyway, my thoughts just at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. Yeah, and I think that that's a great word, is a blend of not just one and then the other. I think a blend and a consistency so that people that are traveling to Cochrane get a sense of well, they don't get culture shock from going from one side of the street to the other. So some consistency. The other thing is, in the land use bylaw, was there any thought with respect to signages, such as in the parks, and using a particular style of signage in the parks and into directions, and so there's some consistency throughout Cochrane with respect to that?
So through the chair, the land use bylaw will definitely deal with signage. But as far as like if you're talking about parks or public spaces that are being guided by the town, it would be very much up to the town to establish our own branding and enforce it, which may not necessarily be this framework would not necessarily be that place where we would look at doing that. There would be other opportunities, even if it's something like the Parks and Rec community, to set their own style guide for how they want to see new parks designed, for example.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I see this as a significant move forward, considering that we've not really had any guidelines when someone is coming to us and asking for development permit as to where to go. I do see some concerns, such as Councillor McFadden talking about the consistency of the different roads, like tying up to the bridge and those kinds of things that I think there's some opportunity to consider going forward. So I've talked quite a bit about that. Adam, if any questions or comments come up for you? No, or George? No?
Myself there. I was gonna say I like Tara's idea of maybe residential as well, especially down in the Greystone area being close. If there was some sort of Western heritage entrance to the new subdivision, would tie it in a little bit. I know they're probably not gonna make all their houses look Western, but
So you'd like to maybe see some kind of Western tie of some sort?
something along that lines
Yeah.
would be nice. Yeah. And I think
But-
if you
but I
were
think-
using some of those funds too, that you get in lieu, maybe some of that Western heritage decoration in front of the Spray Lakes area when you're coming in, because it's just a parking lot right now. Everything's set back from the road. So,
Mm-hmm.
but you're right, there's going to be that huge development just along that whole area in the coming years with the bridge, and everybody's going back and forth across that now. So.
Okay. So does anybody else have any questions or comments? So next steps, Adam, with respect to this?
Yeah, for sure. So as mentioned, this is just our draft right now. We've been taking it back to both our stakeholder group and now the Planning Commission, as well as doing some internal review of ourselves. Ultimately, once we have it finalized, the next step where the commission would see it is when the land use bylaw will be coming through for approval, and it will be an appendix onto that document. So we wanted to make sure that you had additional opportunity to review this, so you're not going back and forth between that and the LUB when you're reviewing it next.
will there be an additional opportunity for public consultation?
We will be posting the draft copy on our Let's Talk Cochrane page for this project. We just wanted to touch base first with our stakeholder group and planning commission to make sure if there was any changes we needed to do before then.
Okay, great. Okay, well, we've had a couple rounds and I think everybody's had the opportunity to bring up questions and concerns. So I think with that, that calls our meeting to an end for today. Our next meeting is Wednesday, April 21st at 6:30 p.m. And can I have a motion to call the meeting to an end? Adam? Okay, all in favor? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lisa.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
A good St. Patty's Day.
Yes.
You as well. Thanks.
Yeah. Back with the hat. Yeah, that's as far as I got when you're at home with COVID. Thank you.